And I guess we are live now.
Yes, we are live. Hi everyone.
So,
Thanks for joining us today. So I'm Chinmay. With me I have Devdatta.
hi
Like
everyone.
like mentioned, we'll be talking about the National Geospatial Policy in today's live stream. So the way that we do this is that we'll be going through the actual policy and our thoughts on specific segments of it, it could mean for not just the government of India, but also the companies that operate within India, and more specifically, because we are here as part of GeoPune, we are more interested in how this policy would affect the lives of the common man, right, or your general Indian citizen. So the way that will work is that we'll talk you through. We'll be having conversations, mostly candid. None of this is really scripted. We have this policy open in front of us, and then we're just going to go through it. What we would encourage you to do is that if you can post your questions, specific thoughts that you may have about either the policy or anything that we have discussed in the comments. We will try our best to answer your comments as we go along. Right. We expect more people to join in. I think right now there are about 5 or 6 individuals who are there, but I hope that more will join in as we go along. Right. So after this live stream, this video will be available on the GeoPune channel, and it will be there for you to refer in case you wish to share it. And also, while I hate to do this, please like and subscribe to the channel so that you'll get notified about any such things that we do in the near future. Apart from following us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, we are even on Instagram now. Uh, so yeah, so let's get started. Okay. So yeah, main thing now, Dave. What do you think about the policy in general? Do you think it's a good move, or was it a badly timed move which doesn't react or really add any value to anyone at all?
I think before answering that, we should probably explain what a policy is and
Sure.
what it means. Forget the contents of it because a lot of people read these things online that, okay, government has released a policy, but the important question is what does it mean? Who will it affect? Is it applicable to everybody? And so on. And usually, if you look at policies, that's where the word politics comes from, is it's sort of what the government is planning to do. It's sort of setting a direction. It's uh, explaining what their plan is. It may not be in detail, but it just tells them that, okay, we want to do A, B, C, D. And from that point of view, it's great that at least we know what the government wants to do. We can see that the government wants to sort of improve on the various geospatial things which they are doing. It spells out things. Now we can discuss about the contents and say whether are they good, are they bad, are they up to date, or are they dated. But looking at what we see, at least indicating what they want to do itself is a big positive. So at least we should thank them for that, because very often the governments work in sort of darkness. We don't know what's happening, and suddenly we'll see that, okay, government has released this data set, or the government has said that no, you can't do XYZ. At least in this policy, it's making it clear what the government wants to do and when it wants to do it. So from that point of view, it's great. And we can then now actually go into the contents one by one and see what it does. One more important thing which we have to realize is that the policy is about what the government plans to do, not what the government expects others to do. So if you look at the policy, A, it will affect the government. B, it will affect the organizations which sort of take on tenders and work for the government. And finally, it will work for all the citizens who are the consumers of the services given by the government, right? It doesn't really affect, at least what they mentioned here, about organizations and people working in the industry, because it's not talking about them. It's not setting new laws or rules. It's just saying that we as the government want to do ABCD, right? Having said that, now we can go into detail of what exactly it talks about and what are its visions and targets, etc.
Sure. Just for everyone's note, I've also added a link to the policy itself on the chat over here, so that if you want, you can even open it on your side if you've not even read it before, if you're curious about what the policy actually contains. Right. So I hope I've tried to maximize it a bit so that you'll be able to read along as we speak about specific points. Uh, So when we dive into the policy itself, the main things of note that I saw personally was the timelines or the milestones that they have set to achieve the vision that they have. Now, in a nutshell, what I feel that the vision they have is to create a framework around the geospatial data that comes in, because frankly, we never had something like this before. And whatever we have is currently in the hands of certain regulatory bodies like Survey of India, or it's siloed up into in certain institutions and uh, your local governments, your smart city interfaces, or your corporates, and then everybody just tries to get something out of sharing that data with anybody who is requesting it. So to that end, I believe that they've set up a few milestones. First will come in say 5 years. So I feel that they've. So I find it a bit strange. Maybe it's because
Yeah, and
that
it's actually not 5 years, it's now just 2 years because Happy New Year to
exactly,
everybody. We are in 2023.
exactly. So I'm assuming that they started work on this. I think in 2021,
Possible
and
because
then
I think they had released the guidelines way back in 2021 January when it was actually liberalized at that time that okay, yes, you as a citizen of this country or an organization in this country can create geospatial data because till then it was completely up to only the government who had the rights to create data according to them. So I guess this is sort of a thing which has carried on from them. But yeah, this 2025 is just 2 years up ahead now.
exactly, which actually brings the rest of the milestones a bit into stark focus, because say in 2025 they claim to be able to visualize a future where they have a framework ready. They have available data services across the board. They're going to redefine the national geodetic framework, uh, which is, I would assume to be a pretty massive task. And then the next milestone is directly in 2030, and then after that in 2035. So it just jumps on to what I recall used to be this 5-year plan that we used to have with the National Planning Commission, where the central body set up to dictate the future of the country. Somehow it just gives me a bit uh, of those feelings. But
And not only that, it like nowadays the world is agile, right? This feels like a waterfall model that this is a requirement document, and slowly it will be suddenly 5 centimeter data will be available in 2030. They're not even planning to do maybe say 50 centimeter in 27 and then gradually improve. So, like we know from the world of project planning and development, if you have high goals but no feedback in between, then you might not actually reach the goals. So, from that point of view, I'm very afraid and very concerned whether we'll be able to actually match what they're saying 7 years from now.
correct. And speaking of feedback, that's one thing that I've noticed, that while there is a committee set up, so let me just scroll down to where this committee is actually there, who will organize the entire thing. Nobody is actually talking about, so yeah, this is a committee, so that you'll have one chairperson, like a bunch of people from representing various departments in the government. There will be representatives from the geospatial industry. The SOI is there, but who's actually going to give the feedback? So what are their roles? It's like, okay, fine, you've got a bunch of people uh, who will be part of this committee, but who actually tracks whether these initiatives are being successful? Because I don't see a central governing body over here. It's just a bunch of people who will come together and discuss. So how how is anybody going to understand what the impact of this policy is on a grassroots level? Because if you look at it, the biggest the player or the people, whatever you want to call it, who are currently deprived of anything geospatial, forget even digital, are the rural areas in India. While in urban areas where there's so much data that's flowing in and out, not just because of what the government has made available, but despite government policies, you've got massive players residing in, especially in Bangalore, in Pune, in Mumbai, in Delhi, uh, who are completely focused on these areas, and they're constantly getting data in. They're building their own spatial data infrastructures. But what about the rest? The rest who currently don't even have it. So if you look at the major maps, for example, most of these villages are represented as dots, and those dots are not even in the right places. You'll have especially in mountainous regions, you just have some random dot, and if you actually try to go there, you won't even find a settlement there. The nearest settlement is about 5 kilometers away, and where this village demarcation is being done is just in the middle of a forest. So, you know, who I mean, who is benefiting from this information? How does this committee, who is uh, in place, or who will be in place to guarantee us a bright geospatial future, going to listen to these problems? How are they actually going to solve the problem where there's no data available, uh, and these people who will actually need this data so that relevant things can be made available to them. So basic things like your food, where are your power lines whether water supply is in place in case there's a disaster which keeps on happening. Right? In a country as vast and diverse as India, naturally speaking and geologically speaking, where you're constantly having floods, you have earthquakes, you've got this and you've got that, which is why you've got uh, bodies like the HOT who will uh, go and have tasks in these regions just to map them out. Uh, so I think this is something that is quite massively overlooked in the
Right.
policy as a whole.
And see, think it's talking about who is going to generate the data, but it doesn't talk about what the application of that data would be, who would be using it. And if you don't keep a user in mind, if you don't figure out how that data will be used, you can't even judge whether your output was important, useful, whether it was successful or not, right? And without that feedback, we can talk about, like, then it just ends up becoming a wish list that yes, uh, these are the buzzwords that are there in the GIS industry today. Let's put them in. I'll give you an example about, I think somewhere they're talking about digital twins. Now the
It's
point is that, okay, what's the point? What's the value of a digital twin? What modeling are you going to do in that digital twin? Are you going to use that, like, is it going to be used by the municipality, or can others also use that model to figure out where they should? Let's talk about one of an example is, suppose you want to figure out where I should set up new advertisement boards, right? So I want to see where people will be seeing it, but can I also see that, okay, if I put on a neon light, which are the residents who will be affected, right? So that is the kind of modeling which you can do with the digital twin. Now, is the government going to do that? Probably not. It doesn't fall in under them, right? So this data needs to be available. It needs to be accessible by others in a timely manner. It needs to be updated. If your plan is 5 years down the line and they start doing it today, it will be outdated the day it comes out. So unless we have that end goal in mind, it all looks like, okay, I'm doing it for the buzzword sake. So to sort of have it on my checklist that yes, I need to make this. Everybody's talking about digital twins. Let's also make a digital twin, but not what it's useful for or who is going to use it.
exactly completely agree. And there's one thing that really bugs me about is that they said that they're going to use like two things that bug me about is this. Okay, there's so much hype that was done about Navic. Then why are you relying on GNSS? Shouldn't Navic be at the forth and center about any kind of positioning that you should be performing on, or is Navic then only going to be restricted to say military use cases, uh, or only via use for specific bodies without actually affecting what will be published to the general public? Second thing is the Internet of Things. Now, Internet of Things sensors is a wide thing. I mean, I can go to my nearest Chroma and buy a fancy refrigerator and washing machine which have their IoT sensors in place, which probably feed back to the company where this particular device is, whether it's functioning well, whether it's full, what kind of things are stored in it, and so on and so forth. So, when they say IoT, what do they really mean? Because it's a very vague term to include, especially when it comes to digital twin, because a digital twin would be, in my view, a recreation at a very granular level of a specific area. So say if I have an MIDC, or if I have a SEZ such as say Hinsaudi, where you've got a lot of high-tech installations in place or high-tech companies coming in, and you need to have a certain level of infrastructure ready to uh, help or facilitate better movement and infrastructure in these regions, that's where a digital twin would really come in handy. Other thing is other scenario that I can think of is where there are where there's highly densely uh, populated regions where your normal maps or your surveying doesn't really work. So at that point of time, uh, you may need to want a digital twin to get a accurate reconstruction of the area. But this is not live data. Live data would go on top of this in wherever it's consumed. So where do IoT sensors really come into play? Do they come into play where they plan to have geospatial dashboards where you can just see things happening, such as where there's signals are out, or there's no electricity for whoever. It may not be for the general public. It may be for uh, what you would say is the local war rooms whenever crises happen. But then those will be separate from digital twins, correct? So this will be a layer on top of the digital twin that is built, not the digital twin
And they're
itself.
not really connected to each other. What I'm afraid of is that they can slowly build things. Like, I can see the value of IoT sensors. Let me give you an example. I had read about somewhere where, for example, flooding is a perennial problem in India because of rivers uh, levels going up and down. Or in cities like Mumbai, it rains and suddenly sewage gets overwhelmed and water starts stagnating. So you can sort of record these water levels and put them on a map or share that data so that other people can build things on top of that. It doesn't need a digital twin. Why are you connecting this to the digital twin? So you can actually set things up today and start generating that data and giving that data out. But if you sort of tied into digital twin that, yeah, I need a digital twin, I'll model it with the data coming in from IoT, so I need IoTs, then it's sort of putting the cart before the horse. You are not, it becomes something which is nice to show in a demo or a presentation or to somewhere, but it's not going to be used at the end of the day.
Agree. On a positive note, though, I'm happy that you actually thought of using a digital twin. At least it means that somebody somewhere has actually read up on what is happening in the world, even if it's a few years too late. Uh, it's in a way it is good that they're at least okay. You know that it's possible. You know that these things exist. You may have, and probably the people who have drafted this section of the policy have seen it working and hoping, or they've actually had some uh, town to town visits, say in European countries where digital twins have been very successfully implemented. So at least it gives me a little bit of hope that there is somebody in the governing body who is actually thinking forward, or at least trying to close the technological deficit that we currently have in the geospatial industry as a whole.
Yeah, and just because we are ranting on this doesn't mean we disagree with what they're doing. We're just saying that, yeah, let's do this. Let's not do it 10 years down the line. Let's do it today. I think that's the point which we're trying to make. So don't feel that uh, like these are useless things which will not be used. They're definitely useful. But if you wait too long, then they'll become obsolete. So let's do these things ASAP.
Exactly. So I mean, a lot of these things actually can be done in parallel. So I don't need to have a national data infrastructure in place to actually start building a digital. I don't see why or what stops the government from using whatever they already have to at least set the foundation and then build on top of that using, uh, say, any satellite data that you're correctly collecting. Speaking of which, I think we just had a discussion a few days ago about the stark absence of any specific remote sensing data
Yeah, I
policies
think
in
if
the
you
geospatial
do an
industry.
control F for remote sensing, I think it just comes once or twice. So, where are you going to collect this data from if you are not talking about satellites or uh, allowing people to collect this data from UAVs and so on? And the funny thing is that there was some news about a new geospatial policy coming up with the geospatial guidelines, but nothing has happened on that. And at least today, the current laws or the rules are that I, as an Indian citizen or a organization, non-government organization, like a commercial or even a private organization, can't purchase or use or even have data which is sub-meter, which is from satellites or UAVs. Then what exactly are we talking about? Are you only going to talk about the government generating and using data? Then what about the others? It still is difficult to talk about improving India or sort of having geospatial innovation if you don't let people do whatever they want to. If you tie them down and tell them that no, no, only in this box you need to do some innovation, it's not going to happen. So the intention given at the beginning of this uh, policy are great, but I don't really see any concrete examples where they want to change things which will allow that innovation to happen.
They've suggested we bring this into an rather an open discussion. The data that is currently available to us as in any given person, either as an individual or as a company, that the government of India has allowed us to use. What do you see are the the drawbacks of the data that is allowed to us, and then how do you think that sub-meter resolution data can actually help a company or an organization actually achieve better results?
Okay. So at the start, let me say that we moved quite ahead than what we were 10 years ago. A lot of improvements have happened. Again, the complaint is the improvements haven't happened fast enough. We'll come to the remote sensing sub-meter level data. But before that, the government has been quite vocal about opening data up. There is a open data policy which the government has, which thankfully says that okay, any most data which has been made using government funds should be available to the general public. They don't talk about price and cost, that's fine, but at least they're talking about it being made accessible to uh, citizens of the country. The 2019 economic survey had talked about open data being a public good. What that means is just like the having data, open data in the accessible to public allows them to do things which the government would not have even thought about. So it's a good thing for the government to generate as much data as possible and make it open and let people play with it. Different kinds of examples and different kinds of products would be built on top of that which you can't even think about. Let me sort of give you an example that when Google Maps started, they were also sort of, yeah, this is my map, you can come to my website, you can give your destination, I will give you a route, you can print it out and take it along in your car. And then some developers came along that, oh, why can't I place my own house on this, why can't I place a marker on this? And a few people basically over a couple of weekends sort of hacked together a few maps. And then Google Maps decided, or rather saw the value in doing that. They saw that okay, there are these large number of people who want to use my data, who want to use my maps, let me allow them to do so. And then they started, or they opened up the Google Maps API, which allowed people to create all of these mashups. Now the word mashup is something which I'm sure we all heard in 2006 7, but now in 2023 it feels very dated. But I'm sort of dating myself from where this comes to. So talking about that, so the government recognizes that data is important, it needs to be opened. So there is, if you have seen the data.gov, that's a very nice what do you say, way to share the data. The sad part is that data is usually not updated. uh, a quick example which I can give you is that the list of pin codes for India has not been updated, I think, from 2016. So that's 7 years um, ago. So if you don't update this data, how do I know it is even valid, right? I personally know of many pin codes in Pune which were cut down into smaller pin codes, or some new pin codes were created, and so on. So having data open, saying that data should be open is one thing, but there needs to be action behind those words. And once that data is open, it needs to be kept updated and regularly updated so that people can expect when they should get that data as well. Now, coming to remote sensing data and high resolution data, uh, as such, today, if you are any organization, you have to buy remote sensing data from NRSC, the National Remote Sensing Center. And even if you're purchasing data from foreign satellites, that comes through the NRSC itself. And if you're not working on a project for a government agency, you can't even buy sub-meter level data. So that's why, for example, if you look at Google Maps or Bing Maps, why do they look better than any of the other maps? Is because their data is of a higher resolution. What I mean by that is the pixels are smaller. You can actually see much more details. Think of like our cell phones today and our cell phones uh, 10 years ago, the images or the photos taken by them. Our cameras have higher megapixel and whatnot, but what that basically means is that you can see finer details in those images, right? So that's why it looks realistic. The first few photos I taken from my cell phone were maybe what 480 by 640 pixel, and if I look at them today, I'll start laughing. So what's the value of having higher resolution images is that you can make out more things. You can actually, instead of having a single center of the road line, you can actually put in, okay, these are the two sides of the line. This is where I have things like, say, the footpath. This is where the footpath is broken. With data which is a 5 meter and 3 meter, which is available, you may not be able to make that out. And that's sort of why we need to have better resolution data so that we can make better decisions about things.
So let me just share a quick tab. I was just doing that on the side. Uh, Basically, this is the current geospatial portal that the city of Pune has through the PMC. So the first thing that you notice is that they've got these bunch of data sets that they have published, but I don't know what I can do with it. So like, okay, great, I can see where the schools are, but then what do I actually do with this? I want to be able to extract this information just so that I can start using it, correct? So the value of geospatial data is not the map. That's one change, like a fundamental change in perspective that everybody who is remotely associated with the industry needs to understand. It's like, say if I go back about 10-15 years, then we could, yes, we could say, okay, the whole digitalization process, as they call it today, was going on, where you had these broad survey sheets, these topo sheets, your paper maps, and then you needed to have them online, which is where your tools like ArcGIS and so on used to come into play. But today, you know, it's not that. The value of data, geospatial data, is the actual granularity of the data itself. It's not the way that you can visualize this data or whether you can access it on your mobile or tablet. That's supposed to be a given. And in fact, there are. If I really want to see the schools in the city of Pune, if I go to Google and just say search this area for schools, I would probably get more updated information because I'm sure I have no idea what the vintage of this data is. What if there are some private schools that are not in here, or there are some open schools which don't really necessarily fit into the classification of what the government calls a school? They might be missed out. So there are a lot of permutations and combinations and unanswered questions that these data sets provide, which I think will be a hurdle. And my biggest fear is that the current policy does not address the mechanism by which this data will be made available to the general public. So let that sink in for a bit. So if you had the fortune or the misfortune, either way you look at it, of dealing with any kind of government body for any geospatial data or any data that you need, you know that it's a tedious process. Even though things have opened up, there are a lot of processes in place which eliminate quite a lot of the babu system that we used to see earlier. It is still not very easy, and it's not easy on different fronts. Say now this let's take this example of the school data. Maybe this data is available on the data.gov.portal. I don't know that yet. I have reached on this map. The ideal way for me to know whether this data is available for me to consume is some way that this map tells me, like, okay, listen, if you click over here, you'll be able to go to the portal itself and download this data. This data comes from so and so source. It was last updated on so and so. It will be next updated on so and so. It has so many data points at this moment. These are the attribute information that I get about this data. And along with that, say a feedback place where I can say that, okay, look, I want this information. Maybe I want to know the names of the principals of all of these schools, or maybe I want to know who the education board is. How are these schools differentiated by the education board? And maybe this data is not available. So then who do I approach to get this data? Right. So then again, we fall into the same pitfalls where I have to go pillar to post, get 100 different permissions from 10,000 different places. And then I'll finally get this data 3 years later by the time my use case has already died down. And I was working on a project. Unfortunately, I've lost this project because I couldn't get the data. So these are the kind
I'll
of
just
use
put
cases.
it in a different way that, see, this map is, somebody has taken decisions on, okay, how to show this map, what these icons mean, how that data should be represented, what a typical user would want to see. But what if I'm not a typical user? Like as Chinmay mentioned, maybe he wants to see which are the ICSE schools, which are the CBSE schools, and which are the IB boards. Can he make out using this map? Probably neither or, right? If he has access to the data, he can open it up in whatever software he has. If nothing else, he can open up a CSV file in Excel and just apply the filters there. When you make data open, you allow it, you sort of free it up to be used in ways which you can't even imagine. You don't get limited by the decisions which were made when presenting this data. Today you're presenting this data in this way, somebody else wants to present and query and analyze it in a completely different way, right? If you allow that data to be free, then those kind of things can be built on top of it. And one thing which we have seen over the last few years is that the you can't really depend on the government to do innovation. The innovation happens where small uh, groups of people working in startups, or even sometimes uh, free independent people from the civil society, or just some students still sitting in some college creating some kind of app which he wants to, right? So are you allowing this kind of innovation to happen by sharing a map like this? Probably not. So the government needs to get outside of their mindset that yes, we are the ones who are creating data, we are the ones who are using the data, we are the ones who are making the decisions, and then we'll just tell it to the citizens that yeah, this is a decision which I have made.
Exactly. So my hope really from this committee that has been built in is, that they take these kinds of feedback and they actually build the how mechanisms, because I feel the job of a policy is to define what and why something needs to be in place, but it's also important for a policy to define or go a little bit into the depth of how it's going to be implemented, which is where I think the policy currently uh, lacks clarity. I mean, it does say a few things. For example, let me just go back to the original tab. I think there's a matrix, this responsibility matrix that has been drawn up, which says that okay, there'll be these bodies who will be responsible for dissemination of this area, this sort of data set, and so on and so forth. But if you think of it as this way, look at the number of responsible parties over here. Now, the like imagine if I have to get a cross-functional data set that uh, has multiple things. So maybe say the land parcel and the population distribution as well as the road and the LULC. These are the kinds of data sets that I need to acquire from a project. How many people will I actually have to chase to get information that I really need? Why can there not be one geospatial body with regional distribution nodes, either digitally or physically, where people can approach to get specific information, and then they get it from the relevant areas. In fact, I will go one level deeper and say that in 2023, when we distributed architectures are so common, and where I can get different geospatial data sets at the click of a button or via a simple command, why do I even need to have departments or physical people or committees involved in the first place? Why can there not be a contactless infrastructure in place where it just queries data sets and get the relevant data sets for? Why do we even need this responsibility matrix for different data sets in the first place? I mean, it feels like we're back in 1998 where people are actually
I
doing
know,
a lot
Chinmay,
of
but I still have some hope because if you looked at how the Survey of India website has updated in the last 1 year, 1.5 year, where you can now actually go and download the open sheet uh, this things topo sheets, as well as you can download raster and vector files from the Survey of India website. So yes, things are slow. They're not as fast as we want them. But if you had told me 10, 15 years back that I could go to the Survey of India website and download a vector file of the villages in a given district, I would have laughed at you. I would have said, "What are you drinking?" So I think we are these organizations are being pulled out of the 19th or maybe even the 18th century against their will, and all of us have struggled against them in the past. Like for example, this was when I was working in the government. I was working for one of the organizations mentioned here, and we needed to get some data from another organization which is also mentioned here, and this was on the proper letter with the seal of the government and everything, and saying that okay, give us this XYZ data. And instead of giving us a vector file in either online or over CD drives at that time, they actually printed out a map, put a stamp on it, saying that this has been released on such and such a date, and send that along with that letter. So that is what we are fighting against. That is the age that we want to get out of. Slowly, some places I can see some improvements happening. Like Survey of India is one. Another one is, I think both of us have worked with the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana data. Uh, so data of that quality, like we can always argue that the quality may not be good or it's not updated or something like that. But imagine having rural data of that uh, much coverage available to you at the click of a button. I think we made a lot of progress.
Agreed. So what I hope is, so all of these points are something that will be addressed when they actually say that they're going to publish the policy. When did they say? About 2025, right? So when they'll actually have this framework in place. So enabling policy and legal framework, uh, you know, liberalization. I don't even want to get into that because I don't know what that means yet in the context of this particular policy.
No, I'll tell you what liberalization means, or rather, I'll say I don't know what it means because in the previous guidelines it said self certification. So, like any reasonable person, I assume that it would just mean that along with releasing the data, I would also say that I, Devdatta Tenshi, certify this data is so and so, and that I meted guidelines. But apparently, the bureaucracy wants me to sign up on a government website, give my Aadhaar card number, give my phone number, give my address, and then they will generate a certificate for me. I don't understand how that is self certification. So I think we still need to have that translator from Babudam to English to understand these things better.
Exactly. But again, like so, I'm assuming that 2.2.1 addresses most of the questions that we currently posed, which is how exactly this is going to be done. What is the mechanism by which this data will be delivered, kept up to date, and how a feedback mechanism would be in place to ensure that this data is kept up to date. Because I mean, if you talk about reality and way that this world is moving, data is no longer bound to a country or any geographic boundaries. Data does not recognize that because data, the primary mode or the mechanism for which data is delivered today is via the internet. So unless you've got something like this Great Firewall of China, which doesn't allow 90% of the websites in the world to be accessed, and we only limit it to whatever is inside of China itself, I feel that the data that is going to be generally available outside the government infrastructure is always going to be more precise, more up to date, of uh, more clear provenance, and of high usability than what will be available by the government. At least until they reach a stage, hopefully via this policy, where this data will be pretty much void of any kind of human contact, unless where it is absolutely necessary, where it's basically at the more creation level rather than the transformation and distribution level. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Going a bit
One
further,
thing what
yeah.
yeah, one thing which I just want to talk about is I've always seen this stuff about developing skills and people skilled in some technology, and I don't really see that being a problem even say 10 years ago or even today. Capacity development, I think it's called here. I think it went up slightly. So, because see, India has been doing outsourcing for the world for a long time, and some of our largest geospatial companies are actually doing projects of a very high quality for the Western world as well as the developed countries. So, I don't really see us not having capacity. The problem is that if you have people, what are they going to do? Are they just going to sit and digitize? Then maybe you don't even need a geospatial education, right? If you need somebody to do something interesting, they will need data. The question is, who is going to generate that data? Will these people have access to that data? And just developing capacity, but then we personally know people in the education field sort of running colleges where the fees are sky high, but what jobs do they get? The problem is not with the capacity. The problem is what do they do once they are skilled enough? Do they have the right kind of jobs to do, or are those kind of jobs even possible in India? And that is something that the government should look at.
Uh, exactly. So one thing that I would say is, I don't know where the specific section also was, that they also go into a little bit into detail where they talk about the education being focused on surveying and which I found was a bit alarming. The reason why I found it alarming was because yes, surveying and broad level surveying, frequent surveying is a necessity. What happens? I mean, basically, same thing that you talked about it. What happens to this data once it is surveyed? Once you actually feed it into a database, what next? You say that you want to build a digital twin, but you're saying that okay, now you started collecting this data, and then how does this data actually become a digital twin? You're not creating the people who are skilled in the middleware to be able to do the things that you want them to do, or is that transformation expected to happen outside the geospatial industry? So that is a bit uh, funny, I would say. It's like it just amuses me is that okay, you are going to focus a lot on the education of surveyors, but you're not going to focus on the people who will be skilled enough to build uh, the tools, the pipelines, the conversion mechanisms, the transformers that will be needed to make this a digital tool. So would that be outsourced then? I don't know. Because frankly,
And probably
who
also, yeah, and probably the question is that once, like, you can talk about surveying, but that's sort of at the start. What about the middle and what about the end? Who will generate the digital twins, and who will consume and use the data from the digital twins? Because always we also need to look at where is the value add happening, right? The value add might be happening in the creation of the digital twin. The value add, maximum value add, might happen once that digital twin is ready and it's used by somebody to do something completely different. Think of why are our pizzas come, like, how can a company promise to deliver a pizza in 30 minutes? I think they have now reduced it to 20 minutes recently, because they have these techniques and tools ready where they know that yes, I can reach all of these houses, all of these flats in 20 minutes flat. Is that, this is just one use case. You talk to your grandmom that okay, or that in her times was food available that quickly? Probably not. People around me still are surprised when I like order Swiggy and Zomato. I think this was very common for us, but there's still a lot of people who are surprised by that. I was talking to one of my neighbors and he was like, oh, where did you get this dish from? Is that, do you know that restaurant? I said, no, I found it on Swiggy. And he was like, and this is a 79-year-old gentleman. He's like, oh, but can you trust Swiggy? I'm like, yes, they will deliver 100%. So think of it this way. If you think from that logic of, yes, I just want to create a digital twin, somebody else will actually add the value on top of that. And that value can only get unlocked if you allow that data to be free, if you sort of build that capacity of using that data. And that is what is sort of missing here.
so it actually brings a quote that is semi-relevant to this current discussion. I remember reading about this some time ago. This was, I think, when the Zomato IPO happened, uh, and when they'd acquired Blinkit, I think. Grofers, Blinkit, I'm not sure who they acquired, but basically the discussion was around these hyper local deliveries and how deliveries are happening within 10 minutes and 15 minutes. Big Basket had to change their delivery cycle from 2 to 3 days to 1 day and 15 minutes, like 2 tiers of delivery just to catch up with the market. And on that, there's a quote. Now, don't quote me. It's not exact quote, but it was something around these lines that there is more investment happening in the world today just to get your groceries delivered a little bit quicker than in cancer research.
Yeah.
Well, I can lament the state of the VCs today. The point that I'm trying to make is that the amount of money there is in the industry just to get your delivery times reduced from 30 to 10 minutes. And if this government, this data infrastructure or this the data policy actually enables data to be available so that these things are possible, that is where the industry is really going to prosper, because that is where the money lies. Because ultimately, if you're running a business, you do it not to benefit the human race for the most part, right? You do it because you want to, fuel money into the economy and you want to make a fortune for yourself while you're doing it. So if that is where the money lies, that is where the market is going, the policy should also help enable businesses to crop up so that they are successful in the future.
Let me give a example of how, like, to explain this to people. Like, the government often talks about building roads, right? We recently had a super fast road built between Mumbai and Nagpur. Now, you and I, as citizens, expect that, yeah, in 3 to 6 months, I'll go down there, I'll go to Nagpur, I want to drive my car on that road at whatever speed they're suggesting. It's like we don't even think that there's anything wrong with that, correct? If the government tomorrow suddenly said that, or we were in a parallel universe where the government talks about building roads, but it's not clear whether the citizens can use that road or not, we would be questioning why government is talking about building roads, correct? So that is the state. People who are not from the GIS industry won't understand this, why we are talking about the data being free, but it's equivalent to somebody saying, yeah, I'm building roads, but not being clear about whether citizens can drive on that road or use that road or not use the road.
Exactly. So the how remains a big question mark. So yeah, maybe we can have a follow-up session in the year 2025 to actually see how much of these questions have actually been answered. Might be a good exercise. It's not too far away anyway. Uh, but yeah, so going on to the next milestone that they have. Uh, Now, like topographical survey, yes, I wouldn't dispute the reason for this is needed. It's a good thing, great. But like, why wait till 2030? I would say that this was, hopefully this should have been available already. Forget in 2025. I I, I wish
Or
that
put
this
it
would have
another
been
way,
a
why not make the data which is currently available at whatever resolution? It may be at 1 meter. Share that. For example, I was involved when I was working for Ananda organization for creating a high resolution data for Mumbai at 1 meter in I think 2012. What has happened to that data? Who is doing who is using that data for what purpose? Has the municipality actually done anything with that data besides like printing maps and keeping them at some place? So we have a lot of good quality data at various government departments gathering dust. They are in these silos which need to be freed and used in some way.
need. So next thing is okay. Same thing is for you want to develop a DEM. So my question over here is now over here in 2025 they say that this policy will be enabled, there'll be a legal framework, supports everything, democratization of data. I don't know how again or what this even means in this context. Enhanced commercialization with VAS. Again, I don't know. It's like VAS rely on top of the data. So why are we talking about it? Do we really need to regulate why what services are added on top of data? But then what happens to this, right? So I still don't know how we go from here to actually creating these fancy digital twins or anything that is promised, because then you're saying that you want a DEM. Okay, you say you are going to have topographical surveys and DEMs, which again I don't know why we need to wait till 2030. I believe that these could easily be modeled within a couple of years for the entire country and then just kept updated based on changes. But those changes are not going to be very frequent anyway, unless you're going to blow up mountains all of a sudden or going to make very high amount of changes. Yes, there will be changes wherever the roads are being constructed and that's moving at a fast pace. But then why not just update those pockets? Why do we have to wait till the year 2030 to have a digital elevation model? And these none of these topics actually talk about what's going to happen before this and how the data is going to get being updated or made available.
And the question is like, we are talking about something which is happening in the future. What about things which are currently happening? Like when I was working in ISRO at that time, we were working on a project called SysDP, which was generating digital elevation models of the entire rural areas at the panchayat level. What has happened to that project? Whether it's known outside, I don't know. So there are all of these kind of projects which are there. What about that? Why are we reinventing the wheel and making the wheel for the nth time? Why not actually use data which you have? And people would say, oh, it's old, but we still use SRTM data which was collected, I think, way back in 2001. It's 21-year-old data, and it's still one of the best digital models that is there across the world, not just in India. There, so sometimes, yes, newer data is better, but at least having some data is better than nothing. And if we plan to have data for the entire country in 2030, then maybe have it for one city in 2025 at least.
Exactly. But what I'm hoping is that there's a follow-up to this policy very soon, which defines, what has happened. Because frankly, it's important to just see how far we have come uh, following the plan. Because now these, and especially this is important when we talk about the fact that we live in a democracy where the government changes hands quite often. And I think right now we are living in one of the longest periods where a single party has held uh, control in the recent past. So, given that into context, it is also important to note that the success of this policy also depends on the success of or how much importance the policymakers assign to this policy going forward. So, tomorrow after elections, because two elections, if I'm not wrong, would happen before 2030.
2030. Yeah.
So, given that in mind, we could potentially have two different governments that come into place before then. I don't want to say
Forget
like
governments, the
party dot, but
politician might change,
exactly.
the secretary might change. So it should not be people specific. So I sort of see the value of policy. They're saying that this is what we want to do. But yeah, having, instead of it being dependent on certain people, it should be that yes, the entire government machinery is interested in this. It should not be coming from the top. All of the organizations which are mentioned in the responsibility matrix should actually want to do that work as well. It should not be put on top of them that, oh, you are supposed to do LiDAR, and you are supposed to do soil, and you are supposed to do train tracks. It should be, yeah, we have train tracks, take it and please do something with it. Make sure that the roads are aligned to my train tracks so that we don't have issues. Or yeah, take my road, take my underwater sewage pipelines, and make sure that when you build the roads there's no problem and you don't break the pipelines for me.
So I don't know much about the ordnance survey actually. That the ordnance survey keeps on cropping in the back of my mind every time. Isn't the ordnance
Yeah, so
survey say the equivalent of the SOI, except the fact that it takes control of all geospatial data in the UK and in
no,
Ireland?
not really. It's equivalent to SOI, but like I don't think they take care of, say, soil mapping or uh, space or things like that. So that's why if you see in the matrix, SOI has the maximum number of responsibilities, and I'm sure they have a large amount of data as well on that. The question is it updated? Is it, who updates it? Like, is there a system for whenever new roads are built in a municipality? How does that flow to the SOI? How does the SOI know that new roads are made? Right? That mechanism needs to be built in some way, instead of having the SOI to go and survey it either using aerial imagery or some new fangled technology. It should be that there should be a process in which all of this data flows from one organization to the other directly. Let me talk about an example. One of the good things which the government has done in the recent past is the local governance directory, which for the first time there is a directory. When I asked the question of how many districts are in India, there's one list which I can refer to. Of course, the local governments might be like the state governments keep on increasing and decreasing the number of districts or rechecking their organization. But there is a process, there's an application which they have to log into and change that information, and then the local governance directly gets updated. So that is something that we want to do. Even though it's centralized, everybody has the shared responsibility of keeping it updated. It's not the responsibility of just that one organization. And in the US, I think there's a board of geographic names which does this, and they've been doing it for 150 years. And why I'm talking about this is many places in India don't have a unique name. uh, you could have, say, for example, a road is colloquially known as something, officially it's named after some politician, tomorrow it gets named after one big building which gets built there, and there's no connection to any of them. And if you go on the street and ask, okay, where is this road, people will have no idea. But you refer to it by colloquial name, people will know it. And there are other examples. I will say I stay in such and such a neighborhood, Krishna Nagar, but nobody will know where the boundary of Krishna Nagar is. Just all of these builders will come up and start deciding new names. In Bombay, they have started coming up with Upper Worli and Lower Worli. Or in Pune, they have now started Kothurud and Kothurud Annex and Pune West. I had never heard of Pune West before 2 years ago. And suddenly, Pune West is what I hear about where all the new property is happening. And Kothurud Annex, which is 10 kilometers away from Kothurud and not even in Pune. So these names are just made up, and at the end of the day, that's human. We all make up names, but somebody has to register it, make sure that it's used by people around so that it sort of gets accepted. And like the LGD is doing that for administrative names. So I see some sort of what do you say, success in the model which they are using.
Hmm. Hopefully that's done. But back to year 2030, I feel that this is such a random point. It just feels like it's been padded in because the education bit has to go in somewhere. Because
Correct.
how is that a milestone, or how is that a sub point of a milestone?
And awareness, like I don't know why they need to create awareness. Maybe, yeah, they need to tell students that okay, possibly this is also a path you can take. Engineering is not the only thing that you can do. Engineering and MBA, maybe after engineering you can also do this. So maybe from that point of view they've put it, but that's not really the point. Like why, what a policy should be doing. You can put it in the educational policy maybe, but in the geospatial policy, I don't know.
So look at it this way: somebody born in the year 2020 would be 10 years old by 2030 when they would start to learn geography, or they at least get
But I
a
think
little
I
more
think they
detail
would
into
probably be
geography.
using. I think they'll probably be using Google Maps before they learn geography. So when they're
Exactly.
taught in school that this is a map, they laugh at the teacher. No, no, this is not a map. A map is on my phone. This is a map. I'm sure this is what is going to happen. So
Exactly. So, I mean, what awareness do we really need to build? This awareness doesn't come through. Somewhere, it's more of a personal point that I'd like to make. It's that somewhere we still are stuck in the Nehruvian era where we believe that any policies that, or forget Nehruvian, I would say that post-independence era, or that whole first half of the 20th century, where we believe that any kind of information that the government publishes to be true is considered by the citizens to be true, and the citizens rely only on uh, what are supposed to be the official channels of communication to base their facts on, which is no longer true in this current time that we live in. So this whole idea that there needs to be a government machinery to spread awareness, that needs to stop, because it doesn't happen that way. Happens at the grassroots. You need to tackle the grassroots, and you need to make sure that uh, your grassroots are educated enough to understand the world around them and to have critical thinking in place. They will automatically be aware of what is around happening in the world around them. They already have the tools. I mean, if you segue a little bit deeper into this, before TikTok was banned, I believe we had a conversation about this also. Before TikTok was banned, it one of the reasons why it was successful in India is that it had permeated through the underrepresented segments and sections of society. So you got your tier three towns and villages and remote areas, which had just gotten internet thanks to uh, the internet being made either cheap or freely available for most places, phones becoming cheaper, and so on and so forth. And they felt, or I mean, the the pulse that I get is that they felt the other platforms were too populated by the urban elite. That they saw this new platform as a place where they can go and express themselves. So when I went on TikTok for the first time in I think 2020, a few months before it got banned, I was flooded with videos of random people in random villages dancing, or then there's someone who was showing me how to operate a motor pump effectively. I didn't know what to make of this information, but then once it was banned, I believe we did have this conversation. Is then I realized it's like these are the underrepresented people of society, and they had enough awareness to know that this platform is out there. You can show your own creativity on this platform, and once you show it, it will be made available to anyone in the entire world who can come and give responses on that. Where was the government in all of this? Nowhere. The people learned this on their own. The only job of the government over here was to make these devices, uh, or enable the industry to provide these devices to these remote areas in the country, and also to enable the industry, double underline, to get internet access to these remote regions. The people learned this on their own. The people didn't need the government to tell them what to do and what not to do. So coming back to this point, I believe spreading awareness and enhancing capabilities and skill will happen if there is sufficient infrastructure, and then they understand how these things are going to progress. The government doesn't really need to take any special steps to promote awareness about this.
No, exactly. Like, why do so many people join MBA or postgraduate colleges? Because at the end of the day, they think that they'll get a job there, right? Again, I'm not saying government should create jobs. I'm saying the government should create an environment where those jobs get created. If there's no point of creating a skilled GIS analyst or creating a skilled uh, surveyor if there is no survey work to be done, or if the GIS analyst doesn't have any data to play with, right? If that GIS analyst doesn't have data to play with, there won't be a job, there won't be a company which will employ him. The government really can't do everything. What they can sort of do is just create that environment where these things happen. And somewhere, I think they have mentioned democratizing things, which is the right way to go about it. Basically, make sure that everybody can use these things. It's done for the common good. It's not for somebody sitting in government to take a decision on things, because very often the government may not even know what is happening at the lower level. Like, often it happens that the people on the ground, even in these government organizations, know more than what is there in the government. That's the organizational memory. Think of like our electricity distribution in places like Delhi, where on top of the pole you'll have hundreds of wires. There's no way in which you can create a map or create a distribution diagram of those wires, right? That information will be known only by the wireman. And tomorrow, when a new wireman joins, he will have to have hands on training with the existing wireman to understand what is happening. Creating a call center where you call and say that, oh, I'm not getting electricity, and they trying to debug it centrally, may not really work to that extent. It can work to a certain extent at a much larger scale, at a much larger level, but not at a large scale. So often it's only when it's decentralized do these things really work out.
Agreed. Okay, so we are almost at time. So we'll just quickly go into year 2035, which is just three random points where our digital twins finally make an appearance. Uh, and then we'll just
And
conclude with a
just for your information, digital twins are currently being used in the Western countries. Like, forget today, they were being used in 2020 and before as well. Uh,
so, yeah, I mean, anyway, we are behind. So maybe this is our
I
chance
really,
to.
yeah, I really like that point of high resolution bathymetric data, because I get flashbacks of one of the government organizations I was working with in 2019, and they were saying, okay, download the bathymetric data from this foreign website. It's one of the premier organizations under uh, one of the major government departments, but they don't have access to the bathymetric data. They have to depend on some foreign website which has these maps, which I'm sure that even, for example, our enemy countries have. So I'm glad that they're talking about these things, but again, der aaye durust hai, but der aaye.
Exactly. I mean, it's necessary. I have actually no idea what a blue economy is. I'm assuming a blue economy is, say, fisheries and river transports
Yeah,
and
everything connected with the sea and water, I think.
something for me to
Yeah.
Google. Maybe another hole to go into after this. So, yeah, subsurface infrastructure again. So, does this mean that we're going to have widely available LiDAR data?
It might be, or see, because ground penetrating radar is something, again, I think it's one of those technologies which has a lot of promise. I personally have not really seen it being used in India much. I don't know whether it will even be possible to map the kind of things that we have in India, where things are placed very haphazardly. So maybe it might be ground penetrating radar, it might be something else which comes in next 10, 12 years. Who knows?
See, there's some space to watch into. And the last thing is again the national digital twin. So okay, of major towns, cities and towns. Why? So if you're going to take until 2035 to build a digital twin, why are you not doing it across the country? Why do you need? I mean, you don't. And see, the thing about digital twin is you don't need an exact replica always. You need not know every single building the way it is. The way digital twins are built is that there are certain buildings that are simulated. There are certain features which are simulated based on patterns that are recognized, things that are seen. So to give an example, or maybe I'll just go back a bit. So a digital twin, for anybody who's not in the know, is a digital recreation of the actual physical area. So say I take say Bandarka Road in Pune, just the road. Now this Bandarka Road has multiple things on it. This actual road itself, the footpaths, the lamppost, trees, the buildings, the windows on those buildings, the way their roofs are structured, uh, the way that they're constructed. Some buildings are older than others. Some buildings are built in the Soviet brutalist way, the ones that were built in the 80s and so. Some buildings are your bungalows, which are built with your sloping roof. Some of those bungalows have Art Deco architectural facades. Uh, some are modern reconstructions. Some of those buildings have been basically demolished, and there are modern glass buildings that have cropped up. Right. So all of this is in one stretch of Bandarka Road. Now I know these things because I've gone through that road. But what if you want to take action on it when you're not in that particular vicinity, but you want to go down to uh, say a door level or a window level and take decisions on that front, or you want to know exactly where on that particular road there is a manhole, right? So that manhole could be on the left, center, right, off the road. We don't know what is the depth at which that manhole lies, whether this footpath is smooth, whether this footpath is broken at particular places, whether there's a tree that's coming up in the middle of the footpath which prohibits free movement. All of these things can happen, and your traditional maps may or may not be able to support this or to give you enough context or visualization about a particular area to be able to understand this. Digital twin would essentially go down to that depth and recreate this entire scene in the digital form that you can go and work with and make decisions upon. Correct? So now that being said, you may not need to have an accurate architectural assessment of a building in that place unless that is your objective. If the objective is clearly defined, you may be able to simulate what these buildings are going to look like. So, say I know what an Art Deco building looks like, I know what a brutalist building looks like, I know what a stone bungalow that is built in the 30s style, I'm not sure what it's called, New Gothic, whatever that was, what that is built like. I can simulate a model of that particular building. Same goes for the kind of lampposts that are there. Same goes for whether it's a peepal tree, whether it's a I don't know mango tree or whatever it is. I don't need to know what that specific tree looks like. I can simulate a tree based on known characteristics. So, given this fact, why can't we have a national digital twin across the country based on information that we have or the patterns that are being observed in that particular area? I believe it could be possible. And way before 2020, 2035, because Microsoft has already done that in the flight simulator. If you go to India, you'll actually see the simulated cities in India. So, data is already there. People have already done it 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Why do we have to wait for 2035 to do that for just the major towns and cities?
Yeah, so I guess the word which, if people want to search more on this, I guess it's called procedurally generated buildings.
Procedure building, generated building, synthetic mapping, so
Yeah.
on.
So these are some things which you can look at where it may not exactly match real life. Like simple example is if I want to create a 3D model of a lamppost, I don't need to measure exactly the angle at which it is and exactly how it looks, right? I I can I sort of assume that along a road, all of the lampposts are similar. I know the height, I know the design. I can just keep go on placing them. Maybe one of them is bent 5 degrees. I don't need to model that 5-degree bend in that lamppost. So this is what you can sort of take shortcuts by assuming suddenly that yes, it's a lamppost of this type. Let's just put that model here.
So what I would, it's a long shot, but I'm hoping that anybody who was responsible for this policy has a chance to get a talk today. Not because they'll understand how much you're criticizing it, but basically this criticism comes from a place of love. What I mean by that is both of us, or in the geospatial industry, or GeoPune specifically, uh, most of us have been in this industry for a long time, and we want to grow in this industry. We may, like some of us, we may start new, say, organizations within the industry in the near future, based on the kind of things that this policy promises. So, given that fact, this is direct feedback from the industry itself and what we want to see in this policy or the implementation of this policy. So somewhere along the line, I really hope that somebody watches this video to understand the kind of concerns that us in the industry have, so that these concerns are met with uh, positive actions on the policy, so that the implementation is a bit more robust, and then we actually get to see uh, the Indian geospatial industry come close to where we are globally. I guess that would be my closing thought for today's session.
My remarks also similar. Like we are not just ranting about this because we don't like it. It's more like yes, all of this is needed. Let's do it ASAP. And we are coming more from the angle of people who will be using these services, who will be using the outputs of all the things which are promised here. If you look at all the newspaper articles on this so far, it's mostly by it quotes all those people, all those organizations which will be sort of subcontracting this work from the government. So they're quite happy about it, and they may not criticize this policy or they might not raise all of these issues because they are more focused on how they can contribute to creating this data. Uh, Both of us are talking more from the point of those who will be using this data, who will be trying to build things on top of it. So our perspective slightly comes from there. I just wanted to make our biases clear because all of us have certain biases and these are our biases. This is the point of from where we are looking at the policy.
So I think that brings our today's session to a close. I don't see any open questions on the chat, so I'll just ask anybody who is currently looking, and if they've got any questions, to just type it on the chat so that we can address it, or then we can close today's session.
Yeah, and you guys can always contact us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram as well. We started on Meetup, but looks like not many people like Meetup. So we've actually had better feedback on these other platforms. So you can connect with us any of those places.
So I don't see any questions. So then maybe we can bring today's session to a close. Thanks everyone who tuned in, who has joined. Hope you that was worth your time on this weekend, and hope you have a great week.
Thank you. Happy weekend.
Thank you.